Hi, I'm Mark Lawson, president of ECS Publishing Group and Morningstar Music Publishers, and we are very pleased to have an opportunity to speak with Jeremy Bankson today. Jeremy has contributed a number of things to our catalog, but a particular amount of brass music that has put in our catalog, and we just appreciate what he's done so much. We thought it would be good to have a chance to talk to him. So, Jeremy, welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be with you, Mark.
Like I mentioned, you've contributed so many things to our catalog, and particularly a number of things for the Easter season. And so many of these titles, like When the Morning Stars Together, Christ the Lord is Risen Today, Jesus Shall Reign, all feature choir and congregation. Did they start out that way, or did you, and you do this combination between choir and congregation naturally, or did you develop it later?
Yeah, I've always had a real passion for congregational song. I think it's really one of the reasons I became a church musician is some early experiences at hymn festivals and things like that. And because of those early experiences, there was something about the power of brass and organ and people singing that really called to me at a very early age. And so a lot of times, there would be a favorite hymn maybe. And if there wasn't something I was aware of, because of my own love for it, whether it's the text and tune and of course the combination, that would call me to that type of thing. And so usually for a festival coming up, a lot of those things I would say kind of stemmed from wanting to write something where we knew we would have those resources. But a lot of them, yes, geared towards congregational song and particularly the hymnody, and maybe even particularly the hymnody that is kind of the traditional hymns. I mean, they're great new things, but there are some tunes that people really love to sing, and that combination of a brass ensemble and maybe some percussion and an organ, when all that comes together, that's something that I think is really thrilling and something that's always been kind of at the forefront of my thoughts in
Right,
that.
right. Well, I know you're an organist, but how did you get started writing for brass? Did you play brass at all? And
A lot of people think I am a brass player, and actually, I've never played a brass instrument. If truth be told, I played the clarinet in high school, and it was simply because the school had one, because my family really wasn't musical. But again, when I was in high school, I attended a fairly large hymn festival. It was produced by Richard Webster at First Plymouth Church in Lincoln, Nebraska. And having grown up in a very small town where our local beautician actually was the church organist, and 30 people on a Sunday was a big crowd. Going to an event like this, that there were about 600 700 people in this room, a large choir, an ensemble. I'll never forget when the opening fanfare for the first hymn began. I just thought, wow, this is spectacular. And about, I don't know, 30 seconds later, the room full of people started to sing, and I thought, this surely is a glimpse of heaven. And so from that moment on, I was kind of hooked with this idea of hymnody and particularly brass and organ writing. And so
Mhm.
that was an early thing that has continued to be very fulfilling for me and inspiring.
One thing I've noticed about your writing is the fact that you do an awful lot where when the congregation is singing, you're using full brass. It's very well supported. But then when the choir sings, you do a really very good job of scaling back or alternating between brass or choir so that the choir can be heard and the brass shine. I'm
Yeah.
sure you're very conscious of that as you do it, but talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, having done this now for a while, one of the things I am aware of is I've been in events, and of course, obviously, I love brass writing, but sometimes there's so much going on that you just can't tell actually what is going on behind the scenes, or what you're trying to focus on. And maybe disregarding the brass for a second, just this idea of alternation in hymnody, sometimes having treble voices sing a verse versus lower voices, or choir versus canon. There's just a lot of creative ways to do it, but I think all of those are opportunities to bring the text to life. And I'd like to think when it's just choir, I don't want to get in their way with a lot of the brass going on. And there are opportunities for them to creatively bring the text to life. There are some stanzas that work really well. There might be particular words that think or conjure the idea of a fanfare. And maybe the next line has something more lyrical. All those opportunities you have to orchestrate, if you will, the text of a hymn. That's usually what I'm kind of after, is finding a way to bring the text to life and trying to be creative about never doing the same thing all the time. Although there's that cohesion, of course, where you have certain ideas that probably return and it seems organic to that particular setting, I would say.
Mhm. Well, not everything that you've written is with congregation and choir. I know that we've got a couple of things that are completely freely written. I particularly love your trumpet tune in G that you've done, and you've got two versions of that. I suppose you've had very good feedback about that piece. So did that come about for your own needs, or was that a commission?
No, as I think about things that I've done, that may be one of the oldest pieces in my memory about being around. And it's one of those things, I don't actually remember a particular, I'm assuming it was a wedding. I don't remember a particular wedding or event where here it is, but I remember playing around with this tune. And of course, it sort of mirrors the traditional trumpet tunes where there's this A, B, C section. And of course, sometimes you need 30 seconds and sometimes you need 3 minutes. And so it also has that where if you want to be creative, you could certainly jump around and recycle parts of it or jump around. And so it certainly has that influence of kind of the traditional trumpet tune. But somewhere in college, I would say I became aware of it as being sort of, okay, here's the tune and here's what it is. And not long after that, when I started publishing, really, I remember thinking, okay, I need to put this in writing in a more solidified way. And so I think the first version was the brass quintet with organ. And actually, that was for a concert where strong influence in my brass writing, Jack Levick. He was the minister of music at First Plymouth for many years. I sort of dedicated it to him for a concert because he was going to be back for that event. And then a very good friend several years later wanted to do a version that was just solo trumpet and organ, and that seemed more accessible, for some places. And so that's how that came to be. But like I said, I think it's been one of the longest tunes that's been somewhere in me for quite a while.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, that you have several things, so I'm going to put you on the spot here. Your last question is, do you have a favorite of the things that we've published? Uh, Please don't mention if it's from another publisher, but no.
Of course not. No.
Uh,
That's sort of like Sophie's Choice in a way. I mean, they're all children in some ways. I will say when I think about that, I consider there are things that I have certainly done because I particularly love a particular tune or text, and those came kind of organically from me. Sometimes then a commission comes along, and I've had a few commissions that I wasn't sure I necessarily loved that particular text or tune, but somehow you dig into it and you find ways to be creative and you live with it, and it comes alive. And so I can honestly say I don't think I've done anything that I dislike. Of course, I mean, the Jesus Christ is risen today, one of my earliest pieces with you. You can't have Easter without that hymn. And I think that piece actually, in some ways, reminds me of the influences of different people. I mean, I could probably go through and tell you this probably came from this, and this probably came from that. And this was my way of trying to create my own version of it. This Joyful Easter Tide is another, I think, fun piece that maybe isn't in the top 10 Easter hymns, but it's one of those great, really great hymns. And I know my choirs that I've worked with have really enjoyed that. The When the Morning Stars Together is another great tune that I feel particularly fond of. So that's a tough question to give a
okay. Well,
definitive
I think
answer.
you've done a good job with it. So
Okay.
very good. Well, I want to encourage those of you watching to take a moment and go to Jeremy's composer page on our website, and you can see all the different pieces that he's written, and you can hear samples. So I would just encourage you to take a look. I think Jeremy has to be one of the most downloaded of our composers at Easter because people often really want to use his brass settings. So, Jeremy, thank you for taking time to join us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure.